Hi students, this is Mr. Yao. So after some discussion with other teachers, we have decided we're going to change chapter 10 up a little bit. We're going to throw away the last section. So today we are going to talk about 10.9, number 1, two rules mixed in your notes. But your homework is actually 10.11, math space. So at this time, I will give you a minute to get your notes ready, or at least have a piece of paper so that you can write something down. You can pause here while you're getting your notes. Okay, hopefully you have your notes ready. So the big idea for this lesson is we are going to need to do distribution first when needed. And I'll actually give you an order of how we should proceed with questions. But first, let's do a quick recap on all the rules we have learned. We learned product rule, which is when we actually multiply the same basis. And in that case, we add the exponents. That's product rule. We also learned quotient rule, which is when we actually divide. And that's the time when we actually subtract the exponents. Just make sure it's always going to be big minus small to avoid negative exponents. And next, we learned about zero exponent, which is whenever you see the zero, it's always going to be a 1. Doesn't matter what the inside is, so just cross it out. Next thing, we learned power to power. That is when you have parentheses and you have an exponent on the outside. Don't forget that y actually has a 1, a hidden 1, invisibility. And all you need to do is multiply them, and you actually get your final answer. The last one we learned is negative exponents. Whenever you see a negative sign, they go to the other side of the fraction, negative sign, so that y will go to the top. So that's a quick recap. If you actually don't remember any certain rule, please go back to the previous lessons and look at the filled-in notes. Hopefully that's going to help. Now let's move on to today's lesson. This next part is actually not in your notes, but this is very important. On this slide, I provided you with some steps of how to actually use these rules in a more complicated question. So please take a minute to write it either in your notes or on a piece of paper. You can pause right here. Now that you have finished writing, let me actually explain how to go through and use these steps. First, power to power. That means whenever you see an exponent on the outside of parentheses like that, the first thing you do is always distribute in the exponents. And after that, you can continue with other steps. Second thing is we will always deal with the zero exponents. So for example, with a question like this, zero exponents with something else, after you distribute it in, you would actually get a 0, and that's a 0 exponent, so we just cross it out. That's the second thing. Third is when you actually end up with some negative exponents, then we follow the procedure and flip them to the other side of the fraction. And only at the end, at last, we will deal with the product rule and the quotient rule, which is when you see the same base, you need to actually put them together, either by adding or subtracting, as the example that I went over in the previous page. Now let's move on to some examples. Number 1, let's go through the steps. First, power to power. We actually don't see any parentheses, so we don't need to deal with that. Second step, zero exponent. I do see a 0, so I'm going to cross it out. And third step, negative exponents. I also didn't see any negative exponents, so we can move on to the fourth step, which is start combining things. I do see the number -2 in the front and the -2 right there. I'm going to combine them. -2 times -2, that should give you a +4. And the next thing I see is these base n. Well, we cross out the other one, so that's the only one left, n cubed. Last thing, we just need to put these two together as your final answer, which is 4n cubed. Voila, we have the final answer. Number 2. Let's go through the steps again. First, we are looking for power to power. And I do see an exponent on the outside, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute that -2. Make sure you actually distribute it onto every single thing. So -2 is on the -3, it's on the p, and it's on the q. -3 to the -2 power, p to the 3 times -2, and then q to the 4 times -2. That step should give us 1/9. When you see a number, please just type in your calculator. And we see p to the -6. Last one, q to the -8. Second step is zero exponent. I actually didn't see anything, so we can move on to the third step, which is negative exponents. I do see negative exponents, which means we need to start flipping. Negative exponents are right here. I have a negative exponent right there, and I have another negative exponent right there. So now I'm going to flip them. The 1/9 stays there. When I flip, since it's basically on the top, I just need to move it to the bottom. So 1/p to the 6th power. And the q, same thing. I just need to move it over to the bottom. 1/q to the 8th. Now we can move on to the last thing, which is product rule and quotient rule. Well, I just have 9p as a base and q as a base. There's no common ones, so I can just put my final answer together, which is going to be 1/9p to the 6th power and q to the 8th power. And we're done. Now let's go through a few more examples. Example 3. I do see parentheses, so I'm going to distribute it. And I would get -4 times 4, which is r to the -16th power. Now I do see the negative exponent, so that's the next thing I'm going to deal with. Since it's basically on the top, I'm going to flip it to the bottom without a negative sign. And that actually is our final answer. Example 4. First, check for parentheses and an exponent on the outside. We actually don't have any. We can move on to the next step, which is zero exponents. I do see zero exponents, so I'm just going to cross it out. And another thing I also notice is there is a negative sign in the front, and there's another negative sign right there, which means I can basically combine both of them together and just leave with a positive. So my question now becomes 3x squared over 3 to the negative x to the negative x2 y squared. Next, I'm going to be dealing with the negative exponent, which I do see right there. That one has a negative exponent. So I have 3x squared over, that is going to the top now. I have another x squared on the top. As for the bottom, I have 3y squared. After I dealt with the negative exponent, the last thing is I need to combine whatever I can combine. I do see the number in the front, which we do need to deal with. And please remember there's a fraction, so just simplify the fraction. 3/3, that gives you a 1. And then we have the x. X squared and x squared. We can combine them. That will give you x squared times x squared. We add the exponents. That's x to the 4th. As for the y squared, that is just by itself staying on the bottom. So that would be a 1 over y squared. Last thing, we just need to put all of these together as our final answer, which is going to be x to the 4th over y squared. The 1 is an extra, we don't need it. So that is our final answer. Moving on, we have 2 more questions. This one doesn't have exponent on the outside, so we can move on to the second step, which is 0 exponent. This one also doesn't have that. We can move on to the third step, which is negative exponent. And we do have a negative exponent. So let's deal with that first. Everything else stays, so we still have the 2, we still have the negative 4, r squared, but this r to the negative 3rd power is going to go to the bottom, so we have an extra 1 over r to the 3rd power. And we're done with the third step, so last thing, we just need to check for same base, so that we can add the exponent or subtract. In this case, we have r squared on the bottom and r cubed on the bottom. We can put them together. And also we can deal with the number in the front. 2 over negative 4, that can be simplified to be negative 1/2. As for the r squared and r cubed, they're both on the bottom, so is r squared and r cubed. We add the exponent, that gives us 1 over r to the 5th power. Last thing, just put everything together. Negative sign stays in the front. We have 1 on the top and 1 on the top, which just becomes a 1. And we have 2 r to the 5th power on the bottom. Now on to the last question. There's no power, so we can move on to dealing with the 0 exponents. I do see a 0 exponent. I'm going to cross it out. Next, we do have a negative exponent on the b, so I'm going to copy everything else, but the b becomes 1 over b to the 4th. I still have the negative 3, I still have the 2a to the 4th, I still have the 3 cubed b. Next, I just need to put together whatever I can. I do have these numbers in the front, a negative 3, a 2, and 3 cubed. I'm going to multiply them together. Negative 3 times 2 times 3 cubed, which should give you 27 times 6, which is 162 negative. As for the a to the 4th, that just stays there. To the 4th. The next thing we have is actually the b, which would be right there. 1 over b to the 4th can be put together. So b over b to the 4th, big minus small, which is on the bottom, 4 minus 1, which gives you 1 over b to the 3rd power. And our final answer would be negative 162 with a to the 4th on the top and b cubed on the bottom. That is our final answer. And that is 10.9, which means now you can actually get on MathSpace and get some homework done. Thank you.